Hey, anatomy students. So today we are going to be covering the muscular system. You should have read and taken notes on chapter 7, which is the muscular system in your textbook. This is just going to be some additional information that will be helpful to you. So both this lecture, this PowerPoint set, as well as your textbook should be helpful pieces to guide you through the muscular system. So muscles. Muscles are everywhere in our body. They are responsible for movement of the human body along with the skeletal system. So with the skeletal system, your tendons are going to attach your muscles to your bones. Okay, so your muscles directly integrate with your bones, and the movement of those two things together with the coordination of a tendon is going to allow your body to actually perform that movement. So muscles will contract, okay, or get shorter. Okay, so every time you hear the word contraction, that means shorten, okay, which will pull on your tendon. Okay, so here you can see your tendons kind of in white, which will then pull on your bones to accomplish a movement at a joint. Okay, so that is how your tendons and your muscles and your bones integrate in order to create a movement. It's all a pulling motion. So there has been some controversy on the number of muscles in the human body. It does depend on how you count them, but we're going to say around 650 to 700 skeletal muscles. In other words, you have a lot of muscles in your body. As you should already know from our histology unit, we have three types of muscle tissue: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. So we are going to just review them very briefly. Smooth muscle is mostly in your places like your stomach, your hollow visceral organs. This is involuntary muscle, which means that you don't control it, and there are no striations. As you recall, there's kind of these little spindle shapes on the cells, which make them very easily identifiable. And these contractions are slow and sustained, okay? And they're mostly moving substances through your organs or along some type of tract like your digestive tract. There are layers of your smooth muscle, okay? Your smooth muscle does have circular and longitudinal layers. Now you can kind of see it in this picture here. You can see that there are layers here that are kind of piled on top of each other, and those are the circular layers. Okay, you can see here it's labeled as your circular muscle or your muscularis here. And then you can see the longitudinal muscle, which is going to run in the opposite direction. Okay, so you can see here these kind of long muscles here, and then it's actually labeled right here as well. Okay, so there are circular and longitudinal, and this is going to help things move along in that digestive tract or in the area in which it needs to be moved. Cardiac muscle, as you know, is found only in the heart. It is involuntary because we don't think in order to make our heart beat. It does have striations or these little stripes on it, which you can see in this animation, and it does have branching chains of cells. Okay, cardiac muscle is the only one that's going to branch. It has what we called intercalated discs, and those are kind of represented by those striations or those stripes here. And you have steady and rhythmic contractions with your cardiac muscle. Your heart is a muscle. Okay, a lot of people are like, the heart is an organ. Organs can be muscles. The heart is a muscular organ that pumps or squeezes blood through the entire body. And specifically, your heart muscle tissue is called myocardium. Your skeletal muscle, this is where it gets juicy, and this is kind of where we are going to spend a lot of time. Your skeletal muscle is attached to your bones. This is voluntary muscle, meaning that you need to actually think, you need to do something in order for that muscle to move. It is striated and has kind of little stripes on it, as you can see in both the animation and the real picture down there. There are single, long, cylindrical, multinucleated cells. Okay, so these cells are very long, and you will find out why kind of later in this slide series. And you have strong, rapid contractions. Okay, so when it contracts, it's all or nothing. And you're going to hear me say that lots, but all or nothing in the contraction, and it is not rhythmic, meaning that there's no rhythm to it. You just move your skeletal muscle when you feel like moving it. So, the biggest thing that you need to know about your muscular system is that a muscle cell is synonymous with a muscle fiber, or it means the same thing. Okay. So, a muscular cell is a muscle fiber. And most of the time, we just use the word muscle fiber to kind of describe that muscle cell. Okay. So, here you can see a large kind of muscle here. You can see little mitochondria here, and then you can see one cell. And we're going to get kind of a little bit deeper in this as we move through this slide set. But you need to know that these muscle fibers or these cells are packed into your organs. And of course, those are called skeletal muscles. You're going to have a lot of skeletal muscles that you'll need to be able to recognize, just like you did with the bones. And you'll find out those this week as well. All right, so the first thing that you need to know when it comes to the anatomy, okay, of the muscular system or the different parts of the muscular system are the wrappings that go around the muscle. And these are made of connective tissue. Now, if you recall, connective tissue is that tissue that is the most abundant in our body. Mostly everything is connective tissue. And if you remember, the function of our connective tissue is to protect. So each single part of your muscular system has a protection element to it. So you are going to see the following. Now, you're going to start with your skeletal muscle up here. So this picture is going to be a larger version, right? And then we are going to magnify again and again until we get very, very small. So we're going to start up here with our skeletal muscle. So every single skeletal muscle will have a wrapping around it, okay? And that is called the epimysium, okay? Now that is this kind of layer right here. It's on the outermost layer, and you can see it here. It's also right here, okay? So around each muscle, your epimysium. Now, each muscle fascicle. Okay, so your skeletal muscle is made of many muscle fascicles, which is kind of like saying a bundle of cells. Okay, so now we're zooming in on our muscle fascicle. Okay, now each bundle of cells will have a wrapping around it called the perimysium. Okay, so peri means middle, so that is your muscle fiber bundles, your fascicle. Okay. Then we're going to zoom in even more. Okay, now we're getting to the cellular level or a muscle fiber. Okay, so remember muscle fiber equals muscle cell, and each muscle fiber will have an endomysium, which is going to be the wrapping around a single cell. Okay, so you can see that here. It's kind of also shown right here, but it's not quite labeled. Okay, and then you have what's called a sarcolemma, which is a fancy way of saying the cell membrane for a muscle cell. So tendons, okay, tendons are going to be kind of a blend of that epimysia, okay? So like I said, you have this connective tissue wrapping around every single muscle. Now what's going to happen is that connective tissue is all kind of going to bundle here. And if you recall, connective tissue does create your tendons, okay? So your tendons are made of that connective tissue and they will connect to the bone, okay? So they kind of blend into that tendon, which cause that articulation or that connection. There are many, many different arrangements that your muscles can have, okay? Now, we're not going to have to memorize all of them, but what you should recognize about these things is that this is directly correlated to why a muscle is named a certain thing, okay? So some arrangements of fascicle muscles. Okay, so in other words, this is just saying muscle cell arrangements. You can have things like circular, like the muscles around your mouth. Convergent, okay, this is your pectoralis major muscle or your pec muscle. Unipennate, okay, which means like basically one long muscle. Parallel, bipennate, parallel fusiform, and multipennate. Okay. So now obviously the difference between uni, bi, and multipennate is going to be how many different kind of branches of that muscle there is. Okay. So you can see here in our unipennate, there's only one kind of long stretch of muscle. In our bi, there's two. Okay. They kind of come together here in the middle. And then our deltoid would be an example of this multi. Okay, it is one like big muscle layer, but there's many different kind of sections of that muscle that come together. One thing that you're going to have to know if you decide to continue and take anatomy and physiology in college is going to be the origin and the insertions of each muscle. Now, for this course, you won't need to know it for each muscle. You just need to know what an origin and an insertion is. So an origin of a muscle is going to be the attachment to the immovable or the less movable bone, okay? The insertion is the attachment to the movable bone. Now, I'm going to tell you an example that might help you understand this a little bit further. But essentially, when a muscle contracts or gets shorter, the insertion will move towards the origin. Okay, so I want you to think about this muscle right here, the bicep. Okay, so if you're looking at the skeleton here, this is like the elbow. Okay, this is your little pointy guy on your elbow. And then you have your shoulder up here. Okay, your acromial process coming off of your little shoulder. That's kind of the little pointy spot that you can feel on your shoulder. So the origin, that is the immovable bone. Okay, so when you're thinking about your bicep, okay, what happens when you flex or contract or make longer? What happens when you do anything to your bicep? Okay, in order to move your bicep, you have to move your arm up or down, okay, or the lower portion of your arm up or down. Now, your insertion is down here, kind of by your elbow, like I said. When you move, the insertion will move towards the origin. Okay, so if you just take your arms right now, you put them down at your sides and you move your arms up, that would be your insertion of your bicep here moving towards the origin. Like I said a couple slides ago, your skeletal muscles are named based on something, okay? Just like everything in anatomy and physiology, when we talked about your different histology tissues, they are named that way for a reason. So, a couple of factors include the direction of the muscle fibers, the size of the muscle, the location of the muscle, or it could be referring to its origin and its insertion. Sometimes the number of origins, the shape of the muscle, and the function or the action. Okay, so everything in the human body, when it is named, is pretty thoughtful, and you will find that with the muscles. So just some examples. The gluteus maximus here. Okay, that is the largest muscle of its group. Okay, maximus. Anytime you see something maximus, it's probably a larger muscle. But there is also a gluteus minimus and a gluteus medius. Okay, and the names itself tell you exactly which one is smaller and which one is mid-sized. Another example is your biceps. Again, your biceps are actually called the biceps brachii, and it has its name for two reasons. So it first refers to the fact that it has two origins, okay, that prefix bi. And then brachii refers to the muscle being in the brachial area. Okay, so this is what we call the brachial area, is like the upper arm area. And so because it has two origins, biceps and brachii, because of the location, it is called the biceps brachii. Here is just a quick view of some muscles in the human body. You guys are going to get a much better kind of PDF view of this. So you can go back to this slide if you want to in the slide sets, if you just want a good look at these muscles. So we're going to touch on the muscle movement for a bit. So most body movements are the result of two or more muscles acting together or against each other. Okay, so whenever your body makes a movement, there's never just one muscle doing the moving. There's always at least another one involved. So whatever one muscle can do, others can do in reverse. Okay, so the prime mover or the agonist is going to be the muscle that produces a particular movement, whereas the antagonist is going to produce the opposite effect on the same bones. Okay. Now, for this example, we're going to, again, go back to our biceps and triceps. Most people know where they're located, and it's easy to do kind of while you're just sitting down or standing up listening to a lecture. So in this example, if you're moving something, okay, so again, this is going to be our elbow here, and then you have your shoulder and your acromial process up here. Your bicep muscle is going to be the prime mover or the agonist when flexing the arm, okay? Now, when I say flexing, I mean that your muscle is shortened, okay? So you're moving your arm up towards your shoulder. That is flexing, okay? And in this case, the prime mover is your biceps, okay? Now, your tricep is the antagonist in this situation. You can see here that the bicep gets shorter, but the tricep gets longer, okay? Now, if you did the opposite movement, okay, if you started from your bent elbow, your bent arm, and you instead dropped your arm to your side, it would go the opposite way. So just like this, okay, your bicep here would be stretched out, and that would be the antagonist, and the agonist would be your tricep. We also have another vocabulary word called a synergist, and these muscles are going to help stabilize a movement, okay? In this specific example, when we're talking about our biceps and our triceps and we're picking something up or moving our arm up, say we have like a glass or something in our hand, what this synergist is going to do is just help stabilize a movement. Okay, so they are either going to produce the same movement or reduce like undesirable movements. Okay, so in this example, you have a muscle in your lower arm called your brachioradialis, and you can see it here. Okay, it's kind of like at the top of your arm on your thumb side. And so this is going to be the stabilizer or the synergist in the movement of your bicep brachii. You will also have fixator muscles, and this is going to stabilize the origin of a prime mover. Okay, so for example, when you are bending over to pick something heavy up, you have fixators in your trunk, okay, which are going to help you maintain your balance. And those are your abdominal muscles, okay? The reason that we have muscles in our trunk is simply for stabilization, and those are called fixator muscles. All right, now we are really going to dive into anatomy and physiology. So everything thus far has been vocabulary terms, as well as just general information about the muscular system and how our muscles and our bones work together. We're now going to get into some microscopic anatomy, and your goal pretty much for this unit is to understand a muscle contraction as well as know what an action potential is and all of the steps that are involved in an action potential. So we are going to get down to the microscopic anatomy, and by the end of this week, you'll be able to tell me how a muscle contraction happens. So here you can see a skeletal muscle fiber. Recall that a muscle fiber is a cell. You're going to have some terms that are going to be interchangeable with terms that you used to be familiar with, maybe in biology, but now are going to have kind of different names when it comes to the muscular system. So first you have your sarcolemma. Your sarcolemma is another word for the cell membrane. So you can see, here is your cell. You have mitochondria, just like a normal cell. You have your nucleus, just like a normal cell. So there has to be a wrapping on the outside, and that's your sarcolemma here, also known as the cell membrane. Your muscle fiber is going to be made of what we call myofibrils. Okay, so even smaller than your muscle cell is a single myofibril. Your mitochondria obviously are going to be the powerhouse of your cells and will supply the energy for a muscle contraction to happen. Now, the way that your muscles are going to contract is from an electrochemical signal, okay? Your nervous system, your neurons are directly related and directly connected to your skeletal muscle, okay? The only way that your muscle will be able to actually contract is from an electrochemical signal. These are going to travel along the sarcolemma or the cell membrane, okay? There's some terminology that you need to know as far as how these signals travel. But basically, you have your T tubules, and these will carry the signal into the muscle fiber. So you can see your T tubules here, and they are going to be pink. You also have a sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is going to be a key player in a muscle contraction and in our action potential. It is important to recognize and to know that the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or this purple kind of web-like thing that is surrounding your entire cell, it will store calcium ions needed for contraction. Okay, that is what that does. So sarcoplasmic reticulum, calcium. You need calcium in order for your muscles to contract. One of the biggest takeaways when it comes to muscle contraction. So just a recap of some vocabulary words, okay? Your myofibrils are long, ribbon-like fibers of a muscle cell. And we just saw what those were, okay? So your muscle cell has many, many, many myofibrils. Inside of your myofibrils, you have myofilaments. These are proteins that are going to be inside of your myofibril, and you have two types of myofilaments. The first type is going to be myosin, which is thick filament, and then actin, which is your thin filament. Another vocabulary term that you will need to know is called the sarcomere. The sarcomere is going to be your functional unit of a muscle fiber. Okay, in other words, it is going to be the single most important thing that is going to work together in order to contract your entire muscle. Your sarcomere is made from actin and myosin. You can see here that you have thin actin filaments, which are going to be these light green things here. And then your thick myosin filaments will be purple in this specific image. The whole idea is that these two things are going to bind together during a muscle contraction. And this entire thing will cause your muscle to contract. So here is actin and myosin up very, very close. So your myosin molecules are purple, and they have like this little club-shaped head here, okay? And this will extend or move up towards your actin here, okay, in order to bind. Actin in green has myosin binding sites, okay? Now in this photo, they are dark green, okay? So you can see that they're kind of underneath this orange thing, and that is where my myosin wants to bind to my actin. But these dark green binding sites are covered by a regulatory protein, okay, which is here in orange, until we have calcium ions come in, okay, through that little webbing thing that I just showed you guys, until calcium ions are present, okay? So until you have calcium, nothing can happen, okay, because my myosin has to connect to my actin in order to contract a muscle. So in this specific diagram, you have a couple of things, okay? Your tropomyosin is going to be this longer protein, okay, which is this dark orange structure that will wrap around the actin to cover that myosin binding sites. Okay, so tropomyosin, it blocks myosin. When calcium is present, okay, so when it comes in finally, another protein called troponin, which is this lighter orange circle, will move the tropomyosin away from the binding sites. Okay, so that is troponin right here. So you have troponin and tropomyosin. Now they are very similar sounding, but you do need to know their difference and how they are different and what they do. All right, so I wanted to show you guys this image so that you can see things bigger and smaller. Okay, so you have your muscle fiber or your muscle cell. Inside of your muscle cell, you have many units called myofibrils. Okay, inside of these myofibrils, you have a contractile unit called a sarcomere, okay, which is here. And all of these proteins, okay, that are lined up next to each other, when they move together, they will cause a muscle contraction. We will get into physiology of the muscular system in part 2.